Hello everyone, if you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
Why I hid in the basement. Have you ever reached a point where you did not want to leave your own house, not because you were lazy, but because one quiet room felt safer than the entire world upstairs? I have. In my American home, there was one place nobody expected to find me, the basement. It was cold, unfinished, and honestly, not very beautiful. But one night, with my marriage under pressure and my mind completely exhausted, I closed that basement door and thought, maybe this is the only place where I can finally breathe. I was living my ordinary life in the United States. There were bills on the table, dishes in the kitchen, children asking questions, messages waiting on my phone, and the familiar sounds of American life outside my window. Nothing looked dramatic from the outside. That was the strange part. Sometimes your life can look perfectly normal while your heart feels like a house with every light turned off. My husband and I were not living in a movie. We had good days, bad days, misunderstandings, tired evenings, and conversations that sometimes ended with silence. I also had another problem that made everything harder: English. I could understand many everyday words, but when emotions became complicated, simple English suddenly felt very difficult. I knew the words "I am tired." I knew "I am worried." But saying what was really inside me was different. My brain seemed to forget its English vocabulary exactly when I needed it most. So I started going downstairs. At first, I told myself I was only looking for something. A box. An old blanket. A piece of clothing. Anything sounded better than admitting, I need to be alone. Soon, the basement became my little hiding place. I would sit there quietly, breathe slowly, and practice simple sentences in English. I need some time. I feel overwhelmed. I want to talk, but I need to calm down first. They were not impressive sentences. They would never win an English-speaking competition. But they were mine. And something unexpected happened. The more time I spent in that quiet room, the more clearly I could hear my own thoughts. I began to wonder whether the basement was actually helping me heal, or whether I was simply becoming better at hiding. Then, one evening, I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. My husband stopped outside the door. He said something I never expected to hear. And that single sentence was about to change the way I saw my basement, my marriage, and myself. The night everything felt wrong. The footsteps stopped outside the basement door, and for a few seconds, neither of us spoke. I could hear my own breathing. Then my husband said, "Are you okay down here?" It was a simple question, but that night, it felt almost dangerous. I had spent weeks pretending I was fine, and suddenly someone was asking for the truth. I looked at the small basement window, at the boxes around me, and realized I had no idea what answer to give. "I'm okay," I finally said. But even I knew it was a lie. My husband opened the door slowly and stood there. He did not come in. He just looked at me, then looked around the room. I expected an argument. Instead, he said, "You have been coming down here a lot." That sentence hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to laugh, because yes, obviously I had. But I also wanted to cry. The strange thing about marriage is that sometimes the person living closest to you can notice your habits before they understand your pain. Upstairs, our American family life continued as usual. The refrigerator was full. The television was playing. Our children were busy with their own little worlds. Outside, cars moved through the neighborhood, people walked their dogs, and life continued as if nothing was wrong. But inside me, everything felt noisy. I was tired of being misunderstood, tired of misunderstanding others, and tired of searching for the right English words when my emotions were moving much faster than my vocabulary. I remember practicing one sentence quietly: I don't want to fight. I want to be understood. I repeated it several times. Slow English. Simple words. One breath at a time. It sounds almost too easy, but when you are emotionally exhausted, even a short sentence can feel like climbing a mountain. My husband finally asked, "What are you doing down here every night?" I looked at him and almost said, "Nothing." That was my old answer. Instead, I took a breath and said, "I feel safe here." He became completely silent. I expected him to tell me that the basement was cold, dark, or strange. Instead, he asked, "Why don't you feel safe upstairs?" I had no quick answer. That question opened something I had been trying very hard to keep closed. I started talking about the pressure, the loneliness, the misunderstandings, and the fear that every difficult conversation would become another argument. I spoke slowly because my English was not perfect, but for once, I did not stop myself. Then my husband said something that made my heart suddenly drop. It was not an apology. It was not an excuse. It was a sentence that made me realize he had been carrying a secret too. America outside, silence inside. The secret my husband told me in that basement was not what I expected. I thought he was going to say he was angry with me, tired of my silence, or frustrated that I kept disappearing downstairs. Instead, he looked at the floor and whispered, "Sometimes I wait until you go downstairs because I don't know how to talk to you anymore." For a moment, I could not move. The basement was silent, but his words were louder than any argument we had ever had. I had always believed I was the only one feeling alone. Suddenly, I wondered if we had both been hiding in the same house, just in different ways. Life in America was moving around us every day. Our children needed breakfast, school routines continued, work messages appeared on our phones, neighbors smiled when they passed our house. And the weather changed without asking whether our marriage was ready. From the outside, we looked like an ordinary family. Inside, we were becoming experts at saying, "I'm fine." That little sentence can be surprisingly powerful. In English, "I'm fine" sounds simple, but sometimes it means, "Please don't ask me anything else." I knew that feeling very well. My husband sat on an old storage box across from me. He told me that he had noticed my tired face, my quiet dinners, and the way I stopped joining conversations. He said he often wanted to ask what was wrong, but he was afraid that his question would start another argument. I wanted to defend myself, but then I remembered something I had been practicing in the basement: listen before answering. so I stayed quiet. That was difficult for me. My mind wanted to prepare a speech. Instead, I listened. He told me he also felt pressure. He worried about our children. He worried about money, work, and whether our family was becoming emotionally distant. Then he said, "I thought you didn't need me anymore." That sentence broke something open inside me. I realized how easily two people can love each other and still misunderstand each other. Sometimes the problem is not a lack of love. Sometimes it is exhaustion, stress, different communication habits, and too many unfinished conversations. I took a slow breath and said, "I still need you. I just don't know how to say it." My English was not perfect. My grammar was not perfect. My voice even shook. But he understood me. For the first time in weeks, we were not trying to win an argument. We were trying to understand each other. Then, just when I thought the hardest moment was over, my daughter came downstairs and asked a question that neither of us was prepared to answer. My basement became my safe space. My daughter stood halfway down the basement stairs and asked, "Mom, why do you always come here when you are sad?" I felt my heart stop for a second. Children have a strange talent for finding the one question adults spend months avoiding. I looked at her, then at my husband, and suddenly my little basement hiding place did not feel private anymore. She was watching me carefully, waiting for an answer. I could have said, "I'm just tired." I almost did. But this time, I decided to tell the truth. "Because I feel calm here," I said. She looked around at the boxes, the old chair, the cold floor, and smiled. "But it is ugly." I laughed. She was absolutely right. There was nothing beautiful about that basement. It had unfinished walls, random storage boxes, an old lamp, and the mysterious smell of something nobody wanted to identify. Yet somehow, it had become my safe space. I sat down and explained that sometimes my mind became too full. Too many thoughts. Too many responsibilities. Too many conversations I did not know how to finish. In simple English, I practiced saying, "I need a quiet moment." My daughter repeated the sentence with me, slowly, almost like a little English lesson. "I need a quiet moment." We both laughed. That tiny moment changed the atmosphere. The basement was no longer a place where Mom disappeared. It became a place where we could talk. My husband sat nearby, listening. My daughter asked why I felt stressed if we loved each other. That question was harder. I told her that love does not mean people never get tired, confused, or hurt. Love means we keep learning how to understand each other. I also realized something about my English. I had spent so much time worrying about speaking perfectly that I forgot the real purpose of language, connection. I did not need complicated vocabulary to explain my feelings. I needed honest words. I am tired. I need help. I feel worried. Can we talk later? Simple sentences became powerful tools in my home. That night, my basement felt warmer, even though the temperature had not changed. But then my husband noticed something I had not noticed before. There was an envelope tucked behind an old storage box. He pulled it out and looked at me. "Have you seen this?" he asked. I shook my head. The envelope had my name on it. My daughter moved closer. My husband opened it slowly, and what I saw inside made me completely forget about our argument. It was something from our own family, a message written months earlier, before I ever started hiding in the basement. Could a basement really heal me? The envelope contained a note from my husband, written months earlier, and the first sentence made my stomach drop. "I know you are struggling. Even when you say you are fine." I looked at him and asked, "Why didn't you give me this?" He looked almost embarrassed. "Because I was afraid you would think I was blaming you." Suddenly, the basement felt different. This was no longer just my hiding place. It was holding pieces of our marriage that we had never learned how to say out loud. I read the note slowly. My husband had written that he missed the woman who used to laugh at small things, talk during dinner, and tell stories without worrying about every word. He also wrote something that surprised me. "I don't need perfect English. I need your real voice." I stopped reading. Those words hit me harder than I expected. For months, I had been treating my English like another problem I had to solve. If I made a mistake, I became quiet. If I could not find the right word, I changed the subject. If a conversation became emotional, I sometimes escaped downstairs. But maybe the real problem was not English. Maybe I had confused perfect communication with honest communication. I looked at my husband and said, "Maybe I am not hiding because of English. Maybe I am hiding because I am afraid of being misunderstood." He nodded. That was the first time I understood why the basement had felt so safe. It gave me control. Nobody interrupted me. Nobody corrected my grammar. Nobody asked me to explain everything immediately. I could breathe. Psychologists often talk about the importance of feeling safe before we can think clearly, and I could feel that idea in my own body. When I was calm, simple English became easier. I could say, "I need a break." I could say, "Please listen." I could say, "I don't understand. Can you explain it again?" These were small sentences, but they gave me something I had been missing: confidence. My basement was not magically healing my marriage. It was giving my nervous system a quiet place to slow down, so I could return upstairs and face my real life with a clearer mind. My daughter sat beside me and asked, "So are you going to live down here forever?" I laughed. "Absolutely not." She smiled and said, "Good, because it is freezing." We all laughed together. For the first time, the basement did not feel like a prison. It felt like a pause button. But the next morning, something happened upstairs that made me realize I could not depend on that pause forever. My husband came into the kitchen, looked at me, and said, "Tonight, I want us to have a real conversation, without hiding, without phones, and without pretending everything is okay." I started speaking again. I thought one honest conversation would fix everything. It did not. That night, I sat across from my husband at the kitchen table, and within 5 minutes, I realized how difficult it was to speak when every sentence carried an emotion behind it. My heart was racing, my English felt smaller than usual, and my mind kept searching for the perfect words. Then I remembered something I had learned downstairs. I did not need perfect English. I needed clear English. So I looked at him and said, "Please listen to me first." That sentence changed the room. We talked slowly. No shouting. No phones. No walking away. I told him what I had been afraid to say for months. I said, "I feel tired. Then, I feel alone sometimes. Then, I don't want to fight with you." These were simple English sentences, but saying them honestly felt like opening a locked door. My husband listened. Sometimes he asked, "What do you mean?" Instead of becoming embarrassed, I tried again. "Let me say it another way." That became one of my most useful English sentences. I began to understand that communication is not an English exam. Nobody was giving me a score. Nobody was holding up a red pen. If my grammar was imperfect, the world did not end. In fact, something funny happened. The less I worried about sounding intelligent, the more clearly I could express myself. I started practicing this approach every day. When I felt overwhelmed, I said, "I need a few minutes." When I did not understand something, I said, "Can you say that again, slowly?" When my husband misunderstood me, I said, "That's not what I meant." These small phrases became part of our daily life. I also started reading short English stories aloud in the basement for 10 minutes each evening. I read slowly. I repeated sentences. Sometimes I sounded like a tired robot trying to become a radio host. My daughter would hear me and laugh. But I kept going. The goal was not perfection. The goal was confidence. Slowly, my voice became stronger upstairs too. I began joining family conversations instead of disappearing when things became difficult. I started talking with neighbors. I asked questions at stores. I even made small jokes in English, although sometimes the jokes were accidentally funnier than I intended. My life was changing, but not because my English suddenly became perfect. It changed because I stopped using imperfect English as an excuse to hide. Then, one Saturday afternoon, my husband came downstairs and found something on my chair. It was a handwritten page filled with English sentences. At the bottom, my daughter had written one sentence for me. I read it twice, and suddenly realized she had understood my struggle better than I thought. Small words changed our marriage. The sentence my daughter wrote on my English practice page was only 4 words, "Mom, please don't hide." I stared at it for a long time. For simple words, but they felt heavier than any complicated English sentence I had ever tried to say. She had noticed everything. The basement door. My quiet evenings. My notebook. The way I disappeared whenever I felt overwhelmed. I hugged her and asked, "Do you think I hide too much?" She smiled and said, "Sometimes." Children do not need a long explanation. They can detect emotional weather faster than a weather app. That little note made me realize that my basement had helped me, but it could not become my whole life. I needed to take what I learned there upstairs. So I started with small words. At breakfast, instead of staying silent when I felt tired, I said, "I need a little help today." When my husband looked stressed, I asked, "How are you feeling?" When I disagreed, I stopped saying, "You never understand me." I tried, "I see it differently." Those tiny changes sounded almost too simple, but they changed the temperature of our conversations. We still disagreed. Of course we did. We were married, not two perfectly programmed robots. But our disagreements stopped becoming automatic battles. We began asking questions before making assumptions. I also noticed something important about American family life. People often communicate through small practical phrases all day long. Are you okay? Do you need anything? Can I help? What do you think? I started paying attention to these ordinary sentences and using them more naturally. They became my real-life English practice. I did not sit for hours memorizing difficult vocabulary. I learned from the people around me. At the grocery store, I practiced asking simple questions. With neighbors, I listened carefully. With my children, I repeated everyday expressions. At home, I read short English stories aloud and then tried to explain them in my own words. Sometimes I made mistakes so funny that my family laughed. Instead of feeling ashamed, I laughed too. That was new for me. English was no longer a test I was afraid to fail. It became a bridge I was learning to cross. And something even bigger happened in my marriage. My husband began telling me when he was tired instead of becoming distant. I began saying when I needed space instead of disappearing. We started giving each other time without turning that space into punishment. The basement was still my quiet place, but it was no longer my hiding place. Then one evening, my husband asked me to come downstairs with him. He had an idea for the basement, an idea so unexpected that I thought he was joking. But when he showed me what he had prepared, I realized he wanted to change the meaning of that room forever. The moment I stopped hiding, my husband turned on the basement light, and I almost laughed when I saw what he had done. The dark, cold room that had once been my hiding place now had a small lamp, a clean chair, a little table, and a handwritten sign on the wall. A place to breathe, not a place to disappear. I stood there speechless. He looked at me and said, "I don't want to take this place away from you. I just don't want you to feel like you have to hide here." That sentence reached a part of me I had been protecting for a long time. I touched the sign and suddenly remembered the woman who had first sat on that cold basement floor, convinced that nobody understood her. She was still me, but I was not the same anymore. I had learned that a safe space can help you calm down, but it cannot make difficult decisions for you. Eventually, you have to walk upstairs. So I did. I started changing small things in my daily life. When I felt overwhelmed, I paused before reacting. When I needed help, I asked. When I did not understand English, I stopped pretending and simply said, "Could you explain that again?" That sentence became one of my favorites. It was short, polite, and honest. I also kept practicing slow English reading in the basement, but now I had a different reason. I was not studying because I was ashamed of my mistakes. I was practicing because I wanted my voice to become stronger. I read simple stories aloud. I listened to the rhythm of each sentence. I repeated difficult words until they felt familiar. Sometimes my daughter would sit beside me and correct my pronunciation with far too much confidence for someone who still misplaced her socks. We laughed, and those moments became part of our family life. Outside our home, ordinary American life continued. There were school schedules, grocery runs, work responsibilities, changing weather, neighborhood conversations, and all the small decisions that fill a normal week. Nothing magically became easy. That was important for me to understand. Healing did not mean waking up one morning without stress. It meant learning what to do when stress arrived. I could step downstairs, breathe, read, pray if I needed to, and collect my thoughts. Then I could come back upstairs. My basement became a reset button, not an escape route. And slowly, my marriage changed too. My husband and I began having conversations before problems became explosions. We learned to say, "I need a moment," without meaning, "I am leaving you." We learned that silence could be peaceful when chosen, but painful when used as punishment. One evening, after dinner, my husband asked me to follow him outside. I thought he wanted to take a walk. Instead, he pointed toward our backyard and said, "I want to show you something." What I saw made me realize that our family was about to begin a completely different chapter. My home felt different again. I thought the surprise in our backyard would be something simple, maybe a new chair or a small family project. Instead, my husband had placed a little wooden table under the trees with 4 chairs around it. On the table was a notebook, a cup of coffee, and a handwritten message, "Let's start here." I looked at him and asked, "Start what?" He smiled and said, "Us." For a moment, I could not speak. After everything that had happened, I expected some dramatic solution. Instead, he was offering me something much more ordinary, time. We sat outside while our children played nearby, and for the first time in a long while, our home felt peaceful without anyone pretending. My husband told me he wanted us to have one short conversation every evening, even if we only had 10 minutes. No phones. No blaming. No trying to win. Just listening. I agreed. Our first conversations were awkward. Sometimes we sat quietly for several seconds, searching for the right words. I still had moments when English disappeared from my brain like it had taken an unexpected vacation. So I used the simple phrases I had practiced downstairs. I feel nervous. I need more time. Can you say that again? I understand what you mean. These sentences were not impressive, but they were useful. And useful language was exactly what I needed. I also began noticing how much our children were learning from us. They watched how we handled disagreement. They noticed whether we apologized. They noticed whether we listened. That made me more careful. I did not want them to believe that a strong family never has problems. I wanted them to see that strong families learn how to repair problems. Slowly, our evenings changed. Sometimes we talked about money or schedules. Sometimes we talked about the kids. Sometimes we talked about something completely ridiculous, like why one sock always disappears in the laundry. That mystery remains unsolved, by the way. But laughter returned. I started spending less time alone in the basement. I still went there when I needed quiet. The difference was that I no longer felt trapped there. I could go downstairs, breathe, read a short English story, repeat a few sentences, and then come back upstairs with a calmer mind. The basement had become part of my routine, not the center of my life. Then something happened that I never expected. One Saturday morning, my husband walked into the basement and found me reading aloud. Instead of interrupting, he sat down and listened. When I finished, he smiled and said, "You sound different." I asked, "Better?" He shook his head. "Not just better. More confident." That word stayed with me all day. Confidence. Maybe that was what I had really been rebuilding. Not perfect English. Not a perfect marriage. A stronger voice. That evening, my daughter came running into the kitchen with a piece of paper in her hand. She said, Hey Dad, I have an idea for the basement." I looked at her paper. And my heart suddenly raced because her idea could turn the room that once represented my loneliness into something our entire family would remember. Forever. The basement was never the cure. The strangest thing about my basement is that I no longer need to hide there. A year ago, I thought that cold little room was the only place where I could breathe. Today, my family sometimes goes downstairs together, and the same room that once held my tears now holds laughter, books, and quiet conversations. My daughter's idea was simple: turn the basement into our family quiet room. We added a comfortable chair, a small reading corner, a lamp, and a shelf for books. I kept one old storage box because it reminded me of where this journey began. But there was one rule: nobody had to talk until they were ready. Sometimes my children read. Sometimes my husband drinks coffee. Sometimes I practice slow English reading aloud. And sometimes we simply sit there doing absolutely nothing, which, as an exhausted mother, I have learned is a surprisingly advanced skill. Looking back, I understand something I could not understand during those difficult nights. The basement did not heal me. It gave me space to notice what needed healing. The real change happened when I started listening to myself, speaking honestly, and allowing my family to listen too. I learned that a safe space is valuable, but a safe space should help you return to life, not disappear from it. My English journey became part of that change. I stopped trying to sound perfect and started trying to sound clear. I learned simple sentences that helped me communicate. I need some time. Please listen. I don't understand yet. Can we talk calmly? I'm sorry. I love you. The words were small, but their meaning was not. I discovered that language is not about showing people how many words you know. It is about giving people a way to reach your heart. My marriage did not become perfect. Real families do not work that way. We still disagree. We still get tired. Sometimes my husband still forgets where he put his keys, and somehow I am expected to know where they are. But we learned how to return to each other after difficult moments. My children also learned something important. Asking for quiet does not mean rejecting someone. And needing space does not mean you stopped loving them. Today, when I walk down those basement stairs, I no longer feel like I am running away. I feel like I am visiting an old version of myself, the woman who thought she had to hide because she was tired, afraid, and unsure of her voice. I want to tell her something now. You were never broken. You were overwhelmed. There is a difference. And maybe that is the message I want you to remember too. If you are struggling with English, family pressure, loneliness, or simply a life that feels too loud, you do not have to fix everything tonight. Start with one honest sentence. Take one breath. Make one small change. Sometimes healing does not begin with a huge decision. Sometimes it begins in a quiet room, with a simple sentence, spoken slowly. My basement became my safe space, but my family became the reason I finally walked back upstairs. And when I closed that basement door behind me one last time, I realized I was not leaving my safe space. I was taking the safety with me.